Listen to the Vibes.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Listen to the Vibes. I'm very happy to welcome Joel David Bond here, who's an explorer and an author. We're going to get to know him and have a great conversation. So let's kick this off right. Joel, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me, Kyle. I am Joel David Bond, and I'm a world traveler, a speaker, a writer, an educator. Wear many different hats, but my main mission really in life is to help people navigate their cultural world, their cultural space. So whatever I can do to sort of help people connect across cultures, connect across boundaries. That's what I've spent the last 20 years of my life doing overseas in various contexts. And I'm here today to talk about some of the challenges I've overcome and how I can help people do that, as well as talk about my recent book that's come out and just share that story with the world.
So, what is this about a reverse refugee?
Oh, yes. All right. So my book is titled As Large as Your Spirit, a reverse refugee memoir. It's my memoir takes place in 2020, so that auspicious year of the pandemic, where I had gone in March of that year to take a 5-day spring break vacation on a remote Greek island with a carry-on bag, just going to go for a week. And the day I arrived, the World Health Organization used the words global pandemic. Everything shut down, and what was going to be a 1-week vacation extended into a 5-month-long stay on this island, unable to leave, unable to go anywhere, away from home, away from family. And while I was there, I discovered a refugee camp on the island that was filled with refugees from the Middle East, where I had been living. And so here I am, a man from the West, caught on a Greek island, trying to get back to his home in the Middle East. And I crossed paths with all these Middle Easterners who were caught on a Greek island trying to get to the West. And so our paths intersected. I ended up volunteering to teach English in the refugee camp for a couple months. And the way our paths crossed really just changed all of our lives forever. So the narrative arc of the story really is this sort of, reverse refugee experience trying to get home. But the story really is about what does it mean to find a place to call home, both physically and metaphorically, spiritually, in your own heart, in your own soul, to come to grips with your own identity, to find your space, really find your community, and what does it mean to do that? How do you do that? So,
Now, if I read correctly, you lived in Iraq.
yes. So I spent 7 years, the last 7 years actually, in the northern Kurdistan region of Iraq. Where I was managing a large private international school and teaching English and managing their training programs for the teachers, and basically helping rebuild education in a post-conflict society. So that was a fantastic experience being over there, and in many ways a very dramatic exit. It's a story from another podcast probably, but it was a phenomenal experience to be able to live there and to call that place home for 7 years.
How were they, or should I say, how did they treat you over there? Were you accepted or?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really very an accepting, open, and friendly society. In fact, Iraqis are known for their hospitality. That just some of the most hospitable, generous people ever. And while, on a global sort of, political governmental stand, there's often disagreement that's there on a personal level between people. They love Americans, they love people from all over the world, basically, and are really happy that people are there to actually come and visit and to see and explore and discover their country, because for so long it had been shut off and closed because of conflict. So it's opening up to the world now. There's a whole vanguard of YouTube adventure travelers that have been through, which is pretty funny to watch all these travelers come through and make these videos on the place I was living. And I was like, yeah, I lived here before you guys knew it existed, before you knew it was cool to be here.
Right. Did you find a lot of them wanting to come live over here in America?
So there is, we're going to drift into the whole immigration, migration, global crisis here, but 1% of the world's population is displaced due to conflict. That's not just Middle Easterners, it's, everywhere around the world. But 1% of our global population are classed as refugees or displaced people. And so a lot of people from that region, I mean, there is just intense conflict, and a lack of opportunity. And what's happening at the moment, particularly in Iraq, is there's actually a fairly large youth boom. There's a lot of they have larger families, a lot of kids that are being born, but there's not a lot of opportunity or infrastructure to really keep them occupied and engaged and gainfully employed. So that lack of opportunity, coupled with that political and government sort of crisis and conflict there, discord between warring factions in the region, basically means that a lot of people are seeking to go someplace else. So there are a lot of displaced people, a lot of refugees who seek to leave because they don't see a hope or a future for staying. That was one of the main reasons why I stayed as long as I did over there, was because I wanted to help really rebuild that education system to encourage people that if they stayed, they could do something. Like if you put your mind to it, and if you really do engage with your community, engage with your society, and put in the hard work, that you can actually see a real change. And I think that providing that message of hope to people through education there was a key part of why I stayed as long as I did.
They emphasize a lot on education over there, don't they?
So it is definitely something that's needed, a big emphasis. Unfortunately, in Iraq, the public education sector is crippled. 90% of educational facilities across the country were damaged during the ISIS conflict. So suffered some physical damage or structural damage, or the organizational structures. So there's, it's just super, super crippled. It's really hard to recover from that amount of destruction. The private education sector is booming. And there's a large growing sector of private international schools. Because what's happened basically is a lot of the local population had moved over to Europe during the Saddam Hussein years. They'd moved abroad, they'd come to North America, they'd gone to Australia. And after Saddam Hussein fell, and the government was sort of restructuring itself, a lot of those families then moved back and retook positions of power, business ownership, politics, leadership, whatever it was. And so they had families overseas. Their children were starting their education overseas. And when they came back into Iraq and Kurdistan, they really wanted to continue that level of education that they'd had. So they invested a lot in educational infrastructure on the private level. So unfortunately, what's really happening in the region is there's a growing divide then between those who can afford private education, that growing gap of wealth, versus those who have to go to the public education sector and basically never finish high school because there's not enough of an infrastructure to really get people through their education. So it's really the rich get richer and the poor get poorer kind of situation, which is tragic. One of my key things that I worked with while I was there was helping connect my wealthy students basically with some of the displaced people in the region. So I got them connected with refugee service projects, volunteering and donations, playing with kids, painting an orphanage at one point, and got them in to really connect and see how the other 1% lived. So if I could connect the wealthy, privileged 1% of my students with the displaced, poor, marginalized 1%, the idea was that eventually there would be able to be some level of empathy that would be built in these future leaders to help make policy that would change these things in the future.
Well, I know for myself, when I meet someone from the Middle East or Asia, I guess they've taken advantage of the education system here. Everyone I've met has been pretty highly intelligent. They're starting businesses or they're doctors, things along that line. And I just wondered if they had that value over there, or they just saw that opportunity and they come here and they take advantage of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've really touched on something that I think is there's a misconception that refugees are poor, marginalized, uneducated, the people who come in to, do the cleaning and serving jobs, sorts of things. And while that is true on a large scale, a lot of refugees and asylum seekers are actually those who had privilege and prestige in their home countries and were unable or unsustained it was untenable for them to stay in that country. So when I volunteered at the refugee camp in Greece when I was there during the pandemic, I learned that so many of my students had been doctors, lawyers, cabinet ministers in the government, and for whatever reason were unable to stay in their home countries. It was economically, no longer viable. There were social pressures, whether for identity or religion or orientation, whatever reason it was. And so a lot of them had to leave. And when they found themselves in the asylum seeking process, they realized that they would be unable to continue their level of education and their work in a new country without having language skills. And so being able to learn another language and then translate their education, translate their skills, translate their certifications into a new political structure would be really their only hope for success. So it really was fascinating to see how motivated a lot of my students were, and how highly intelligent they were, but were unable to communicate it in English. And so helping them navigate that process was really it was a great honor to do that.
Well, I want to get to know what makes you tick. So, did you find that you had to leave here to find yourself, or were you already on that journey before you left?
Oof. So, I mean, I've spent the last 20 years living overseas. Have only recently relocated back here to the US. And I mean, I think we're all in a lifetime path of self-discovery. You never arrive, right? There's never,
Right.
we'll arrive when we're dead, right? Um, so I think for me, the process has been one of unfolding discovery and self-growth. Um, every place I've lived, every community I've engaged with has given me valuable lessons and insights on who I am and where I need to go from here. And I think hindsight is always 2020. You can look back and see, oh, now I see how these things, pointed towards where I needed to be. And I'm in a transitional stage right now where I'm kind of trying to pick up on those clues and look back and be like, okay, well, what's the next thing? Can I predict the next step based on where I know I've been? With any luck, I'll have some hints on where to go. But I think what really drives me over and above anything else is just the desire to connect, to expand my horizons. I've always been a bit of an explorer ever since I was a little kid. I'd sit, you play make believe with your friends, right? When you're, a toddler, when you're in preschool, primary school, and, people play doctor, or fireman, or whatever. I always wanted to be Indiana Jones. I wanted to be an archaeologist. I wanted to be an explorer. I wanted to, go to the moon. I had all these, big ambitions to go someplace really far away, to discover something new, to always, look what's around the next corner, basically. And I think that's always driven me for all of my career pursuits and my many different hats that I wear, is to always figure out what's around the next corner. How can I figure that out? Where can I go? How can I connect?
Well, I grew up outside of Houston
Mhm.
and lived there all my life. And then I got remarried, and about 6, 7 years ago, we moved up here to the Austin area. Now, for me,
Mhm.
that's a huge thing. I mean, if I had went to Iraq, I probably would have freaked. This was a big deal,
Yeah,
even though it's only 3.5 hours away from home. I left family and friends behind, and I
yeah.
finally really got in touch with who I was when I moved. I don't
Mm,
know if it was the distraction, getting away from that, or a lot of my friends were still acting like they're in high school and partying
mhm.
and all that, and I didn't want to be a part of that scene anymore. I didn't think
Yeah.
I really grew until I moved away. So I
I
was
think you've
curious.
you've really touched on two really key concepts there. One is that every change is a loss and every loss is a change. So when you make that transition geographically or socially with your community, you are creating a sense of change and you're losing something. You've lost something that is in the past, but also when you lose those things, you also see that you change, you grow, and you develop. And as you sort of put yourself into those new environments, those new contexts, maybe the core of you doesn't particularly change, but now you've expanded around that core to allow more space. And it's really hard to go back into previous iterations of yourself, or previous communities or social situations when you now have become a larger person around your core being, and other people haven't seen that change. So that's basically that's the concept of reverse culture shock, and it can happen anywhere from Houston to Austin, from as it can from Kansas City to Iraq. I think anytime you're in that new position, you find yourself really having to reflect. And I think that's really the core, really the key component of understanding cross-cultural work and what I'm doing in general is you really can't understand anyone else until you know yourself.
Right.
It's that self-discovery process that allows you to build those empathy muscles and connect with others and understand their viewpoint. Because without knowing who you are, you'll never really have a clear picture of anyone else.
Well, the one place in Texas, if you want to find a different group of people, is definitely in Austin. There's there's a reason why they say keep
Austin weird, right?
Exactly. Well, what has been the greatest hurdle in your life?
Oh man. I think well, honestly, the biggest hurdle is where I'm at right now. I think, and I mean, I think at any given point in time, you could almost say your biggest hurdle is your current situation.
Yeah.
Because you're always, you're kind of, having to use the tool sets that you have to grow and build into a new iteration of yourself. And I think honestly, where I'm at right now has just been incredibly difficult transition. Because I was asked to leave Iraq by the United States State Department due to growing conflict in the region. And there was actually a threat on my safety
Mm.
in staying there, which I really hate to say, because Iraq, has such a bad press, and it has such, like, oh, it's such a dangerous place, when really it isn't. It's incredibly, I felt far safer there than I do here in America, to be honest. Really just an incredibly safe environment with some of those hospitable, generous people that I've ever met in my life. It just so happens that on a political level, on a government scale, there were issues at play that prevented me from being able to stay. And so I had to leave. Um, so that, I think, has just been a really harsh reality, to have to come back into a space that I've been absent from for a very long time, and have to almost reinvent myself now in this stage. So I'm now back here, and finding myself doing more public speaking and writing my second book, and just reconnecting with a culture that I'd been away from for a long time, while at the same time having lost my community and lost my home and lost my position over there, the prestige that I built for 7 years. So it's definitely a reinvention process for me now. It's hard.
I can imagine people exaggerate, or you get this idea that, oh, this place is bad, these people are bad, and then when you actually get to know them, then it's a whole different thing. That's a problem with, I think, social media. You get this stereotypical idea of a group of people because everybody on social media says it's a certain way.
Yeah.
And then when you go and you meet these folks, you're like, this is nothing like I've been told.
Yeah, it's the echo chamber of social media. It doesn't help, for sure. You get caught in your own like-minded circles, and the algorithm feeds back to you more of the same. And I think part of my big mission, really, and what I want to achieve, is to help people, walk through those open doors, to, figure out, how do you connect across those boundary lines, whether it's cultural or political or social, economic, whatever that might be, religious divides, to really take the time to sit and listen with open ears and empathy, and see the world from someone else's perspective. It's the classic, To Kill a Mockingbird, famous, but we all had to read in high school probably. There's, and at the end, you see the main character sit on Boo Radley's front porch and see the world from his perspective, and you're like, huh, Like maybe it's not as scary, maybe it's not as frightening if you can just put yourself in someone else's shoes and see what they're feeling and how they perceive the world and what they're doing to contribute for the betterment of society in their own way. So, um, yeah, I think that's really what I would love to see happen is just have more people be able to walk in other people's shoes for a day.
If people would just take the time.
Yeah.
As the saying goes, close your mouth and open your ears.
Yeah. There's a reason God gave us 2 ears and one mouth, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So do you work with people one-on-one, or is your work mainly through the education in your book?
So at the moment, I'm through my book and through public presentations. So speaking to organizations, local clubs, school assemblies, that sort of thing. So I'm working in those spaces to really raise awareness for some of these issues and to sort of to throw out there this picture of what could happen if you were able to develop these empathy skills. And I do that through providing cross-cultural talks, sort of exposure, presentations on the culture and life of, what it's like to live in Iraq, to see things just visually presented on the screen of this is how how work in another country can do wonders really for, someone in middle school to be like, oh, wow, like there is a different world out there and I could go and explore it. And if I was able to sort of suspend judgment for a moment, it might be really cool to go and actually, do these things in somewhere else in the world. So that's kind of the space that I'm working in right now. And yeah, it's really exciting to be able to show that to people, to show the rest of the world in a way that, kind of goes a little bit beyond just your typical, travel vlogger thing. Here's someone in person who's lived in these places and can bring the culture to you, basically.
You're not living on Instagram.
No, no. Although I do have a pretty active Instagram, but it's the at the end of the day, what I really want to do is connect live. To put people in those places where they can experience it. Either take them there or bring it to them.
Now, did I read correctly? You got a degree over in the UK?
Yes, yeah. So I have my master's in education from the University of Nottingham, based in the northern part of England, and just graduated actually 2 years ago. Which is a great honor and privilege to be able to do that. So yeah, so I lived in the UK for 12 years before I moved to Iraq. So that made that kind of a fairly easy bridge to get my education done over there. My undergraduate was here in the US, but master's degree was from there, yeah.
So any plans to maybe explore another country?
Oh yes, yeah, 100%. Currently looking at some potential options in maybe Southeast Asia or possibly South America as a next move to live for a couple of years and explore, go deep into culture there and see what options are available. But I'm also open to staying here in the States for a while longer and seeing what I can do to bring my experience from overseas back here. Because it's one thing to just go out and live all of these things and to experience it, and then it's another thing to be able to share it and help other people grow. So there's definitely a part of me that's considering staying here for a longer period of time than I've ever thought I would before.
What'd your family think about all this?
Um, well, I am the global nomad, and so there's a part of them that's like, oh yeah, he talks about staying, but he'll be gone tomorrow. He's going to go somewhere. But the other half is they're very glad to have me back here for a while. For however long that season is. It's nice to be here, and I've got nieces and nephews that are growing up, and you know, older parents that I get to spend some time with as an adult child, which is really a gift. How often do you really get to spend time with your parents as an adult? Lots of quality time. So there's a lot of it here where I'm gonna stay here for a while and at least use this time while I have it.
What I think is crazy is I actually had family that tried to discourage me from moving from my hometown up here.
Hmm.
And I think when you discourage anyone from trying to, I don't care what their goal is, if they're wanting to be an artist or a musician or a nomad,
Yeah.
you should encourage them, not discourage them. You're 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 shackling them.
Yeah. Yeah. Let people fly. Let people do their thing and be creative, because I really believe that we are created to be creators. That's part of that, sort of divine, image that's sort of stamped in each one of us. And so whatever faith or unfaith you belong to, I think there is something, a spark, a spirit within each of us that inherently knows that we're designed to grow and to change, to create. And that if we stifle that, we're doing something to stifle the divinity within us all. So take that and put that in whatever religious framework that you operate with. But I genuinely feel that there's something about growth and change that we're created and designed to do.
I mean, you never know what a person can become if someone just got behind them and encouraged them. So,
Right.
have you run across anyone that's come to you and said, "Hey, what do I do? Everybody tell me no, not to do this."
Oh yeah, I've had people cross my path numerous times. Just asking for advice and wondering, what's the next step? What do you see? What's your perspective and what I could do and how I could really achieve these sorts of things. And I think that's such a great honor and a privilege to have someone ask you that. And I think it's actually something that we should all be asking of each other far more frequently. Because other people see us with eyes that we don't have, and can maybe see our blind spots or see potential in areas that we never thought we had. So it's definitely worth asking.
So where can people buy your book?
I'm available on Amazon, on all the global markets there, Amazon.com, or wherever part of the world you're listening from. It's the book title is As Large as Your Spirit by Joel David Bond. And you can also find me on my website, joeldavidbond.com, as well as social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
So what's been your craziest story on the road before we finished?
Oh, craziest story on the road. So the first one that pops in my head is I had a time when my car got impounded by the secret police in Iraq because it had been parked in a place where it was suspected of being a terrorist bomb.
Oh no.
And it's a long story, longer than we probably have time for here, but essentially I had parked my car in a place where it shouldn't have been parked, basically, long term. And I had left it for a couple of days. It was okay to have left for a couple of days, but just in the wrong space. And it raised suspicion from the neighbors, who saw this dirty car with an out-of-state license plate that had just traveled halfway across the country with, we'd kind of been in a hurry when we'd left, and so there's like trash in the back seat, and I think I'd left a black bag, a duffel bag in the
Oh
back seat or
no.
whatever. And so, whoever came along saw this, and it hadn't been moved for a couple of days, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, like this must be a bomb or whatever." And so they called the local security force, who came and broke the window and towed it away, disconnected the battery, basically, made sure that it was, a legit, make sure it wasn't a car bomb. And at the time, I actually had been then out of the country for 2 days or 3 days or whatever. And so they tried to contact me because they found, the registration. And of course, my phone didn't have signal and I wasn't able to answer. So I just sat in the impound lot for about a week or two before I was able to recover it. So all that to say, if you ever own your own vehicle in Iraq, make sure you know where to park it so that it doesn't get suspected of being a terrorist bomb. That said, I will say, and again, I just have to reiterate, Iraq is very, very safe. And one of the reasons I'm really glad that they did that is they were doing their job. And like, if they had not suspected, I would have been more worried. So actually, it's one of those things I'm very grateful that they called me and said, "Oh yeah, like we impounded your car because it was suspect." I'm like, "Good, you guys did your job." Fantastic.
It's crazy. Joel, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
And I will put all your links in the description to make it easy for folks to find you.
Fantastic. All right. Excellent. Thanks a lot.
And I also want to thank all you folks out there. If you are new to the channel, I hope you'll come back. Please hit that subscribe button for my regulars. You guys are awesome because you make it possible for me to do this. Until the next one, everyone, please take care. Be kind to one another. God bless and peace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Listen to the Vibes. You can catch us on Buzzsprout or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. and on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook at The Vibes Broadcast Network